Hello and welcome to a very different tactical breakdown show. This is of course a show typically where we break down players in which Arsenal are linked to, give you guys the insight and everything that you need to know regarding those players and possibly what might happen to them in the future and whether or not they'll end up at Arsenal. Today's show is different. First of all, Happy New Year, and I hope that your 2021 is a lot better than what many were for 2020. In today's show, we're going to be talking about something which is quite big regarding Britain right now, and that is the impact of Brexit. Yes, it's not the most exciting topic in the world, but it's certainly something that affects Arsenal. Now, what I want to make clear from this show is that there is no politics going into this show whatsoever. There's no bias, left or right, whatever. This show is purely about explaining to you what the impact of ultimately Brexit is on Arsenal as a club. What does it mean for their recruitment? What does it mean for the players they can and can't bring in? And how might this affect how Arsenal operates in the future? Let's crack on with the show and get some education going. So how will Brexit affect Arsenal? It's an interesting question to consider, and it's something that I hopefully will be able to comprehensively answer as much as possible throughout the show. If you do have any questions, of course, please do try and leave some in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. A side note from this is saying that this builds on a lot from an article written by The Athletic, which I have used to help with this presentation and talk to you guys a little bit about what this will do to Arsenal in the future specifically. But if you want to know about more of the broader scale of football and in general, give the link in the description a click and it will take you to The Athletic, where they'll be able to educate you about all of that. So obviously we have now left the EU, which has left us in a situation of unknowns, really, lots of unknowns. But ultimately for this video is, will the signing of players actually change? And in short, the answer is very much yes. If we actually have a look at kind of the main thing that this changes, it's the fact that no under 18s will be able to be signed from the EU, whereas before this was completely legal, and Arsenal in fact did it on quite a regular occasion. Last summer Arsenal spent plenty of time trying to do this, and they brought in some young players from Europe. We saw Nikolai Moller join from Malmo, we signed George Lewis from Framlavik, we signed Joel Idaho from Ajax, and we signed Salah Eddin from Feyenoord. Feyenoord being the last club that he played for, he in fact joined as a free agent. But the key thing about the new regulations is that Arsenal wouldn't have actually been able to sign either of Idaho or Salah if they would have been part of any January recruitment, because they of course are under 18 years of age. Lewis and Moller do qualify past this, but we'll come back to those two a little bit later on. So, looking specifically then at the other clubs, not only Arsenal have pushed for this, Manchester United and Chelsea themselves have gone out and added younger players as well. We've seen Chelsea sign 5 and United sign 6 under 18s in the last summer window. You also saw Manchester United go out and sign the likes of Facundo Pellistri and Amad Diallo, who will join in January. So every club is very well aware of what is going on, and clubs are moving to deal with this also. Under those regulations, to give you an example, you remember Arsenal signing Cesc Fabregas and Hector Bellerin from Barcelona back in the day. These players would not have been able to join Arsenal under the new regulations. They joined when they were around 16 years of age, and that meant obviously that they were free to play at that time. But under the new regulations, had Arsenal have looked to sign them in this January window, it would not have happened. So, how can you get around this problem? There are, in fact, ways in which clubs can still sign players under the age of 18, but it requires a little bit of a loophole. Let me give you a couple of examples. So, if we look at Leicester, and if we look at not only them, but a couple more clubs, Leicester have a partnership with a club in Belgium called OH Leuven. It's not the only example of this either, and I'm going to show you. So we've got Brighton have got a combination with USG in Belgium also, and Sheffield United have a partnership with Beerschot. Now, these clubs can sign under 18 players because they are within the EU in Belgium. So what Leicester, Brighton and Sheffield United do is that they can work together with those clubs to identify players who are then signed by those clubs. They develop in the youth academies of these teams within the EU until their 18th birthday, and then these Premier League sides can buy those players off of their sister clubs or partnership clubs as if they had been in Leicester or Brighton or Sheffield United's academy the entire time. So there are still ways clubs can move around this. If they fall into the categories where they could be signed at 18 years of age, those clubs will move to do that. There's another example which I know many more of you will be very much aware of, and that is Manchester City. Manchester City, of course, are part of the City Football Group as kind of the main flagship of the corporation, but is an ever-expanding group of clubs that now incorporates 9 in total. You may have heard of their partnerships with Girona and New York City FC and Melbourne City Football Club, but it goes much beyond that too. Yokohama F. Marinos are part of this, along with Montevideo City, Yokohama being in Japan and Montevideo being in Uruguay. You've also got Sichuan, which are in China. You've got Mumbai City, which is in India. Lommel SK, also in Belgium, similar to the clubs that we've looked at previously. And Troyes in France. And you've got such a large array of clubs now incorporated into this City Football Group. The key ones to look at, though, are Girona in Spain, Troyes in France, and Lommel in Belgium. Of course, these clubs being within the EU mean that Manchester City have clubs which they could use to develop youth players up until their 18th birthday before they chose to then purchase them. And that's now incorporated into 3 extra clubs. So Manchester City are very much covered from that situation. So what does this obviously then mean for Arsenal? Arsenal are in a situation ultimately where we don't have a specific sister club. The closest that we do have is a club called Colorado Rapids in the MLS, of course, owned by Stan Kroenke, our majority and now full shareholder at the club. But this sisterhood does not matter in the case of Arsenal when you consider the fact that the Colorado Rapids, of course, play in America, meaning that they do not have the same links to the EU. They can't work that around like City and Leicester and Sheffield United and Brighton do with their EU-based clubs. Arsenal then obviously will need to look out and try to find a club which they can form a partnership with if they would like to use that route that many other clubs are benefiting from that we currently are not. So what about the players over the age of 18? Well, there's a point system which has now been put in place where if a player is of 15 points based upon different categories, they can still move very easily from a club within the EU and to the UK. Now, the way that the players get these points are based on a number of things. Firstly is international status, I'll come on to that in a second, as well as league status, and that depends on the nation and the club of which they play for. Continental minutes, how many minutes these players have played in European competitions like the UEFA Europa League or Champions League. You can tell I'm an Arsenal fan with the way I've prioritised the way of putting those two around. And finally, club success. So domestically, if you play for a club that has either won the league or done very well in the league, that will also affect how many points you are worth as a player. So if we have a look at the FIFA top 50, if you are a player that is playing international football for one of the top 50 nations in FIFA's world rankings, this video of course coming out on the 1st of January 2021, so if you're watching this at a later date, you may need to check the FIFA world rankings, which you can do by going onto the FIFA website. But at the current state of play, there are several nations that are outside FIFA's top 50. But if you fall within that and you've played over 90% of the minutes during your time with the national side, you will pretty much be automatically qualified with the 15 points. But for some examples, Greece, Finland, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Slovenia and Bulgaria all are falling outside of the top 50. So players like Dinos Mavropanos, who Arsenal signed at a very young age, would not have qualified through that specifically. And that ultimately means that players that we have signed from other nations wouldn't have also happened. Talking about leagues though, La Liga, Serie A, the Bundesliga and Ligue 1, all of these leagues fall within a bracket whereby players playing for clubs of these leagues will be worth a significant amount of points, and we're pretty much close to that 15-point mark. But the problems are, as we've seen with Nikolai Moller and with George Lewis, is whilst these players were over the age of 18, because they played for the Scandinavian nations of Sweden and Norway, these nations only provide a score of 4 points. The further down the tiers you go with the nations, the less points the players can be worth. So had we have tried to sign Moller or Lewis in January, this January, we would not have been able to because they would have not have been worth enough points. Hence why Arsenal went out and moved for them in the summer of 2020. If we then look at players that would fall between that 10 to 14 point bracket, if it is determined that a player hasn't quite reached that 15 point mark, what happens is it goes to an independent panel where they look at exceptional circumstances as to why that player has not reached 15 points. If that panel finds very exceptional circumstances as to why the player is not yet at 15 points, they can still grant that player a transfer, but as I've said, this is only in very exceptional circumstances. So what does this mean for Arsenal? Well, for Arsenal, this ultimately means that we're going to have to change tact with our young players. We've done as much as we can in the summer of 2020 with the signings that I've mentioned. We've also got a young Dutch centre-back in Omar Rekic coming in from Hertha Berlin, joining as a 19-year-old, so he never fell within that under-18 bracket, but he joins this January. But in the market, we shouldn't be too affected in some of the senior figures that we're looking to go for. It also means that Arsenal may need to look more within and look within the UK to sign more Premier League or just English proven talent in the English leagues, which we haven't typically tended to do. In fact, the clubs that we have signed from most recently in the Premier League are Chelsea, Manchester United and Southampton, all of which Cedric David Luiz, Willian Cech and Callum Chambers and Danny Welbeck were not players that you would typically to consider to be prime players that were there and not surplus to requirements at those clubs, besides maybe Callum Chambers. So it's something that Arsenal will definitely need to change in the future. I hope this has been an educational video for you, and I hope you've appreciated the time that's gone into the research around it. As I say, if you have any questions, please do make sure that you leave a comment in the comment section below, and I will do my best to try and answer them for you from the research that we've done. If you could drop a like on the video, I'd really appreciate it. If you could also subscribe to the channel to get access to more content and more videos, I'd appreciate that as well. And please hit that notification button. It will let you know when there's a show dropping, and of course when we do our live show straight after games, podcast every single week, and raw reactions to the latest Arsenal news. I'll see you again very, very soon, and as always, up the Arsenal.